The twinkle lights cast their golden glow across our living room, each bulb carefully positioned to create the perfect suburban Christmas tableau. I smoothed my red dress one final time and checked the roast in the oven, my hands trembling just slightly. 20 years of hosting Brandon's Christmas Eve dinners had taught me that everything had to be flawless. Everything except me, apparently. Brandon's laughter boomed from the living room where he held court with his usual audience. The scent of expensive whiskey drifted toward the kitchen as I carefully transferred the prime rib to the serving platter. It was beautiful, perfectly cooked, the kind of meal that graced magazine covers. I should have felt proud. Instead, my stomach churned with the familiar anxiety that preceded any public gathering. "Madison, bring that roast out here," Brandon called, his voice already showing signs of his third scotch. "Everyone's dying to see if you managed not to burn it this year." I took a steadying breath and lifted the heavy platter, navigating through the archway in my heels. The same heels I'd worn for 15 years to these parties because Brandon insisted they made my legs look presentable. The same heels that chose that exact moment to catch on the edge of the Persian rug. Time slowed as I stumbled forward, fighting to keep the platter balanced. I caught myself, saving the roast but sacrificing my dignity as I lurched ungracefully in front of our guests. The room fell silent for a heartbeat before Brandon's voice cut through the air like a blade. "There goes Madison again." He threw his head back in exaggerated amusement. 20 years and she still can't walk in heels. Maybe I should have married someone with better coordination. His business partners Richard and Tom chuckled uncomfortably while their wives studied their wine glasses. Carol, Brandon's mother, sked in disapproval, though whether at me or her son, I couldn't tell. Ashley, his sister, looked everywhere but at me. From the kitchen doorway, I caught sight of Zoe, our 17-year-old daughter. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides, her face a mask of barely contained fury. In her eyes, I saw the same humiliation I felt burning in my chest, mixed with something else. Determination. I set the platter down on the mahogany sideboard, arranging my face into the practiced smile I'd perfected over 2 decades. The smile that said everything was fine, that his words were just playful teasing, that I wasn't dying a little inside with each public humiliation. "Well, at least the roast is still in one piece," I said lightly, proud of how steady my voice sounded. "And it doesn't need heels to make it to the table." A few genuine laughs rippled through the room, and I saw Brandon's eyes narrow slightly. He didn't like it when I fought back, even gently. As I carved the meat, I caught Zoe's eye again. She mouthed something I couldn't quite make out, but the intensity in her gaze made my hands pause. Something had shifted in my daughter over the past few weeks. She'd been watching, listening, planning something. I finished serving, moving through the familiar choreography of hosting. Compliments on the meal, discussions of Brandon's latest real estate development, the kind of surface-level chatter that filled these evenings. But underneath it all, I felt it building. The pressure, the tension, like a storm gathering just beyond the horizon. Standing there in my perfect dining room, surrounded by people who saw me as nothing more than Brandon's wife, I realized something with crystal clarity. I'd been serving myself up for slaughter for decades, arranging myself on a platter just as carefully as I'd arranged that roast. But tonight felt different. Tonight felt like the Last Supper. The humiliation of that Christmas Eve wasn't new. It was simply the latest verse in a song Brandon had been composing since our wedding day. But I hadn't always been this fragile creature who jumped at shadows and apologized for existing. Once I'd been Madison Clark, an interior designer with dreams bigger than this Connecticut suburb. I'd had opinions, ambitions, a voice that people listened to. The transformation had been so gradual I'd barely noticed it happening. When we met, Brandon was the golden boy of real estate, 24 years old with charm that could sell snow to Eskimos. I was 21, fresh out of design school and completely captivated by his confidence and vision. He swept me into his world of expensive restaurants and weekend getaways, making me feel like the most important person in his universe. "You don't need that little design job anymore," he'd said after Zoe was born. "I make enough for both of us. Our daughter needs you home." It made sense at the time. I was exhausted, overwhelmed, and secretly relieved to step away from the competitive design world. Just for a while, I told myself. Just until Zoe was older. But somehow a year turned into 5, then 10, then 20. Every time I mentioned going back to work, Brandon had a reason why I couldn't. Zoe needed me for this project or that activity. The house required too much management. His business was at a crucial juncture, and he needed me to entertain clients. The isolation started small. "Your college friends don't understand our lifestyle anymore," he'd say when I planned girls' nights. "They're jealous of what we have." Gradually, the invitations stopped coming. When my sister Emma visited from California, Brandon would monopolize conversations, subtly highlighting how different our lives had become. Eventually, even she called less frequently. The financial control felt protective at first. Brandon handled all the money matters, setting up joint accounts and giving me a household allowance. "Let me take care of the business side," he'd insist. "You focus on making our home beautiful." What I didn't realize was that I had no access to those joint accounts, no knowledge of our real financial situation, no way to build my own security. The criticism started behind closed doors. My housekeeping wasn't quite right. My cooking lacked imagination. I gained weight after Zoe's birth and never lost those last 15 pounds. "I'm just trying to help you be the best version of yourself," he'd say after pointing out my flaws. But gradually, the private critiques became public jokes. The helpful suggestions became cutting remarks delivered in front of others. I started having panic attacks when I was 35. The doctor recommended therapy, but Brandon balked at the cost. "We can't afford luxuries right now," he said, despite his new BMW sitting in our driveway. I learned to manage the attacks alone, hiding in bathroom stalls and supply closets when the world felt like it was closing in. Zoe saw everything. That was perhaps the worst part. She watched her father systematically dismantle her mother's sense of self, and I was terrified she was learning that this was what love looked like. I'd catch her studying us with those intelligent eyes, absorbing patterns I desperately didn't want her to learn. The affair started around year 10, or at least that's when I first suspected. Late phone calls taken in the garage. Emergency business trips that coincided with gaps in his credit card statements I wasn't supposed to see. Lipstick shades on his collar that weren't mine. When I finally worked up the courage to confront him, he made me feel crazy. "You're imagining things, Madison. You're stressed, paranoid. Maybe you should get back on those anxiety meds." He'd turn it back on me so skillfully that I'd end up apologizing for accusing him, grateful that he didn't leave me for being such a suspicious wife. The worst part wasn't even the affairs. It was the way he'd made me complicit in my own destruction. I'd learned to laugh at his jokes about my inadequacies, to smile when he flirted with other women in front of me, to make excuses for his behavior to anyone who dared to question it. By year 15, I barely recognized myself. I'd become a ghost haunting my own life, existing in the beautiful house he'd built as my prison. Every decision ran through him. Every thought was filtered through his potential reaction. I'd become so small that sometimes I wondered if I'd disappear entirely. But Zoe was watching. Zoe was learning. And Zoe was growing stronger every day, inheriting not my weakness, but some fierce part of me I thought I'd lost forever. She was becoming the woman I'd once been, the woman I'd forgotten I could still be. The weeks leading up to Christmas that year felt different, charged with an electricity I couldn't name. I threw myself into preparations with manic precision, as if the perfect holiday could somehow paper over the cracks in our foundation. The house had to be flawless. The food had to be extraordinary. Maybe then Brandon would remember why he'd married me. His business partners were coming, Richard and Susan Chen, venture capitalists who held the keys to Brandon's latest development project. Tom and Jennifer Walsh would be there too, with Tom serving on the city council that would vote on Brandon's permits. These weren't just dinner guests, they were chess pieces in Brandon's game of success. Carol arrived 3 days before Christmas, sweeping into our home with her usual air of disappointed resignation. Brandon's mother had never approved of me, finding me too ordinary for her extraordinary son. She had a way of making helpful suggestions that felt like indictments. Perhaps if you styled your hair differently, dear, or have you considered Pilates? It works wonders for women your age. Ashley and Jake would drive up from Manhattan Christmas Eve morning, bringing with them stories of gallery openings and Broadway shows that made my suburban life feel even smaller. Ashley had always been everything I wasn't: successful, sharp-tongued, childless by choice, with a husband who adored rather than tolerated her. The medical bills were hidden in my purse, folded under receipts and grocery lists where Brandon wouldn't think to look. The cancer screening had been a wake-up call, brought on by a lump I'd found during a rare moment of self-care. The mammogram, the ultrasound, the biopsy, all paid for with gift cards I'd saved over months. I couldn't risk Brandon seeing the charges and demanding explanations. The test results were in a sealed envelope I carried everywhere, but didn't have the courage to open. What if it was bad news? What if I had to fight this battle in secret too? The not knowing felt safer than the truth. My small rebellion had been the consulting work. 3 months of answering design questions online, using a pseudonym, building a tiny savings account $50 at a time. It wasn't much, but it was mine. My first independent income in 20 years felt like breathing air after being underwater. Until Brandon found out. I'd been careless, left the laptop open to my consultant dashboard. He'd exploded in a way I'd rarely seen, his face contorting with rage that he usually reserved for business rivals. Are you trying to embarrass me? Making it look like I can't provide for my family? The threats came fast and cold. He'd cut off my credit cards, my access to the household accounts, everything. I'd have to ask permission for grocery money like a child asking for an allowance. The consulting work ended that night, along with my small taste of independence. Zoe had overheard the fight. I found her afterward, sitting on her bed with tears streaming down her face. "Mom, you don't have to live like this," she'd whispered. "We can figure something out together." That's when I told her about the medical bills, the fear, the envelope I couldn't open. She held me while I cried, this 17-year-old girl being stronger than her mother. "We'll get through this together," she promised. "Whatever it is, we'll handle it together." Over the next weeks, Zoe changed. She became quieter, more observant, constantly on her phone or laptop. When I asked what she was working on, she'd say college applications or senior project, but there was something secretive in her manner that reminded me of myself hiding those medical bills. Brandon's behavior grew stranger too. Hushed phone calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room. Business trips that didn't add up, inconsistencies in his stories. I'd find things that didn't belong to us or Zoe. A woman's sweater in the laundry basket in a size I'd never worn, a coffee cup with lipstick stains in his car. The week before Christmas, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. Going through pockets before doing laundry, I found a receipt from a jewelry store. Not just any jewelry, but an expensive necklace purchased 2 days after he'd refused to buy Zoe the graphing calculator she needed for AP math. As I orchestrated the perfect Christmas, I felt like a director staging a play where I was both performer and prop. The beautifully wrapped gifts under the tree, the hand-decorated cookies, the carefully planned menu that would impress his business partners, all of it felt like elaborate set pieces in someone else's story. But I wasn't the only one preparing for a performance. I caught Zoe printing something in the office late one night, quickly closing the laptop when I appeared. She kissed my cheek and said goodnight, but her eyes held secrets. Christmas Eve morning, as I basted the turkey and checked the dinner rolls, I felt it building like pressure in my ears before a storm. Something was coming. Something that would change everything. I was orchestrating a perfect Christmas while my life crumbled behind the curtains, but I wasn't the only one with a script that night. I just didn't know my daughter had written the final act. I underestimated Zoe. For 17 years, I'd seen her as my baby, the child I needed to protect from the ugly realities of her parents' marriage. But Zoe had been watching, learning, and preparing in ways I never imagined possible. It started with her computer skills. While I struggled to send emails, Zoe had grown up digital, absorbing coding languages in school like I'd once absorbed color theory. She was quiet about it, the way teenagers are about things adults wouldn't understand, but I'd seen her help classmates with technical problems and fix our router when Brandon couldn't. What I didn't know was that she'd been using those skills to investigate her own father. "Mom," she said one afternoon in early December, sitting beside me as I wrapped Christmas gifts. "Do you know Dad's cloud storage password?" "Why would you need that, honey?" She hesitated, chewing her lip the way she had as a child when deciding whether to confess some minor mischief. "He uses the same password for everything. Your birthday backwards with a hashtag. Pretty easy to guess." The casualness of her tone made me look up sharply. "Zoe, you haven't been." "I know about the affairs, Mom." Her voice was steady, mature beyond her years. "All of them. Multiple women over the past 5 years. I have photos, texts, hotel receipts. Everything." My hands stilled on the wrapping paper. The gift beneath, a book for Carol, suddenly seemed absurdly normal given what my daughter had just revealed. "Zoe, you can't. I have bank statements too. Accounts you don't know about. Properties in different states. Mom, he's been hiding millions from us." The room spun slightly. I set down the scissors before I could hurt myself. "How long have you known?" "I started looking after the fight about your consulting work. I was so angry watching him control you like that. I wanted to find proof of what kind of man he really is." Her young face carried a weight no teenager should bear. "But I found something else. Something bigger." She pulled out her phone, scrolling through screenshots and files with the efficiency of someone who'd spent weeks organizing evidence. "There are payments. Regular payments to someone named Dylan Santos in California. They started 19 years ago." The name meant nothing to me, but the timeline made my stomach drop. 19 years. I tracked it back, Mom. The payments coincide with Dad's business trips to Los Angeles. I found birth records, school enrollment, even social media profiles. She took a shaky breath. "Dylan Santos is Dad's son. He's 19 years old." The book slipped from my hands. 20 years of marriage, and I'd been afraid of affairs. I'd never considered there might be another child. Another family. His mother's name was Lisa Santos. She died 2 years ago from cancer. Zoe's voice cracked slightly. "Dylan has been reaching out to Dad since then, wanting to know his father. Dad's been ignoring him mostly, just sending money." She showed me a photo from Dylan's Instagram account. The resemblance was unmistakable. Brandon's strong jaw, his dark eyes, even the way he held his shoulders. This boy looked more like Brandon than Zoe did. "I made contact with him," Zoe continued. "Told him who I was. He didn't even know Dad was married, that he had another daughter. He just wanted to meet his father, maybe understand why he wasn't important enough to be acknowledged." My mind reeled. All these years of feeling inadequate, of believing Brandon's criticisms and accepting his control, and he'd been living a double life more complete than I'd ever imagined. Not just affairs, but a son. A child he'd supported financially but ignored emotionally. "What are you going to do with this information?" I asked, though part of me already suspected. Zoe's smile was sharp, carrying echoes of a strength I'd thought I'd lost. I'm going to give Dad the Christmas gift he deserves. The gift of truth. Zoe, this is dangerous. If your father finds out you know all this, he's going to find out anyway, Mom. I've been planning this for weeks. Dylan is driving here for Christmas Eve. He should be in town by now, waiting for my signal. You invited him here? Zoe, no. Your father will lose his mind. Good, she said with quiet intensity. Maybe it's time he understood what it feels like to have your world turned upside down. Over the following days, I watched my daughter with new eyes. She moved through our Christmas preparations with the calm focus of someone executing a mission. She helped me cook, decorated the tree, wrapped gifts, and printed evidence in the office when Brandon wasn't home. The night before Christmas Eve, she came to my room carrying a beautifully wrapped box, larger than a shoebox, but not much bigger. For Dad, she said simply. His real Christmas present. I held the box, feeling its weight. Inside were 20 years of lies, carefully documented and organized by a 17-year-old girl who decided her mother deserved better. Who decided she deserved better, too. I'm proud of you, Mom, she said, kissing my forehead. For everything you've survived. But it's time to stop just surviving. As Christmas Eve dawned, I realized I wasn't the only one who'd been living a secret life. While I'd been hiding medical bills and stolen moments of independence, my daughter had been building a case for justice. While I'd been protecting her from the truth, she'd been preparing to set us both free. I wasn't just exposing an affair. I was reuniting a family that never knew it existed, and in the process, maybe finding the one we'd lost. Christmas Eve arrived like a perfectly orchestrated storm. Every guest arrived precisely on time, as if following some cosmic stage direction. Carol sailed in first, resplendent in silver and judgment, immediately critiquing the placement of the centerpiece I'd spent hours arranging. Ashley and Jake followed, bringing with them the energy of Manhattan success and stories about restaurant openings I'd never attend. Richard and Susan Chin arrived with a bottle of wine that cost more than I spent on groceries in a month, and Tom and Jennifer Walsh brought their teenage son, who immediately disappeared into the basement with his phone. The house filled with the familiar symphony of these gatherings, clinking glasses, measured laughter, and conversations that danced carefully around anything too real. Brandon was in his element, holding court in the living room with a crystal tumbler of 25-year-old scotch. I moved through the evening like a ghost, refilling drinks and adjusting napkins, hyper-aware of every detail while my mind raced with the weight of Zoe's revelations. Madison, dear, Carol said, cornering me in the kitchen as I checked the dinner rolls. You've put on a little weight, haven't you? We should talk about some low-impact exercises for women our age. Our age. Carol was 73, I was 39. But in her mind, we were both past our prime, both disappointments in our own ways. Ashley found me arranging the cheese board and immediately launched into stories about her latest gallery opening. You know, Madison, you really should get out more. All this domestic focus can't be good for your mental health. When's the last time you did something just for yourself? 3 months ago, when I'd tried consulting work and been shut down in the cruelest way possible. But I just smiled and asked about her new apartment, letting her assume my silence meant contentment rather than constraint. Brandon's voice carried from the living room, regaling Richard and Tom with tales of his latest development project. $50 million in luxury condos, he boasted, each unit starting at 7 figures. All while I'd been denied the money for Zoe's graphing calculator. I slipped into the office for a moment of peace and found the wrapped box Zoe had placed there, waiting like an unexploded bomb. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, box delivered as requested Z. The message wasn't for me. Back in the kitchen, my hands shook as I opened the oven to check the prime rib. The medical envelope crinkled in my apron pocket, still unopened after weeks of carrying it like a talisman. Good news or bad, it felt less important now than what was coming. Brandon's phone had been buzzing all evening, and I watched him check it with increasing frequency. Each time, his jaw tightened slightly, his smile becoming more forced. Someone was texting him, someone who was making him nervous. The text from Dylan, I realized. The son he'd never acknowledged was somewhere in town, waiting. Zoe moved through the evening like a dancer, gracious and helpful, betraying nothing of the explosive device ticking in the office. She chatted with Ashley about college applications, helped Carol find her reading glasses, and even managed polite conversation with Tom's sullen teenager. "You've raised such a wonderful daughter," Susan Shin told me as we watched Zoe serving appetizers. "She's going to do incredible things." "You have no idea," I thought, watching my daughter with a mixture of pride and terror. By 8 o'clock, the alcohol had loosened tongues and lowered guards. Brandon's jokes grew sharper, his laughter louder, his confidence more brittle. He was performing success with the desperations of someone trying to convince himself as much as others. "Madison," he called from his chair, swirling his scotch. "Come tell Richard about your little cooking obsession. Tell him how you spend all day perfecting recipes like it's rocket science." The room fell into that uncomfortable silence that had become so familiar. I forced a smile, but before I could respond, Zoe appeared beside me. "Actually, Dad," she said, her voice carrying a steel I'd never heard before. "I think it's time for presents. I have something special for you." Brandon's eyes narrowed slightly. There was something in Zoe's tone that penetrated even his alcohol-fogged awareness. "Presents? Honey, we do those after dinner." "This one can't wait," she said firmly. "I'll just go get it." I watched her walk toward the office, each step echoing in my ears like a countdown. Around the room, conversations resumed, but there was an undercurrent of tension, as if everyone sensed we were balanced on the edge of something irreversible. My phone buzzed again. This time the text was clearly meant for me. "Whatever happens, Mom, you deserve better than this. I love you." Brandon's phone lit up simultaneously. Even from across the room, I could see his face pale as he read the message. His hand tightened around his glass, and for a moment, I thought it might shatter. Three truths were about to collide in our perfect Christmas tableau: my cancer scare and decision to leave, Dylan's existence and need for a father, and 20 years of financial and emotional crimes about to be exposed. None of us were ready for the devastation that was coming. But ready or not, Zoe was walking back into the room, carrying a beautifully wrapped box that looked innocent enough to contain a sweater or a book. Instead, it contained the power to destroy one family and create another. She set it on the coffee table in front of Brandon's chair. "Merry Christmas, Dad. I think you'll find this gift illuminating." The box sat on the coffee table like an unexploded bomb, wrapped in elegant silver paper with a red velvet bow that Zoe had tied with surgical precision. Brandon stared at it, his knuckles white around his scotch glass, and for a moment the room held its breath. "Well," Richard Chin said, breaking the tension with forced joviality, "aren't you going to open it? Your daughter seems very excited about this gift." Brandon looked up at Zoe, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Fear. He'd spent 17 years controlling every aspect of our lives, but he couldn't control this moment. His phone had been buzzing all evening, and now his daughter was looking at him with an expression that promised reckoning. Of course, Brandon managed, his trademark smile sliding into place like a mask. "Though I have to say, sweetheart, you're making this very dramatic." Zoe perched on the arm of my chair, close enough that I could feel her nervous energy, but her voice remained steady. "Some gifts deserve drama, Dad." He untied the bow with hands that trembled slightly, either from the alcohol or anticipation of what lay beneath. The paper fell away to reveal a white banker's box, the kind you'd use for important documents. Completely innocuous, except for the neat printed label on top, "The Truth About Brandon Webb, a Family History." The room went dead silent. Even Carol stopped mid-sip of her wine. Brandon lifted the lid with the caution of someone who knew he was opening Pandora's box. Inside, the contents were organized in neat layers, each with its own divider and label. He lifted the first section and photographs spilled across the coffee table. Pictures of Brandon with woman after woman, spanning 15 years. Restaurant dinners, hotel entrances, embraces in parking lots. Some faces I recognized, others were strangers, but all were clearly intimate, clearly romantic, clearly not his wife. "Zoe." Brandon's voice was warning, dangerous. But she didn't flinch. "Keep going, Dad. It gets more interesting." His face cycled through emotion, shock giving way to anger, anger battling with panic. But the guests were watching, so he lifted the next layer with the mechanical movements of a condemned man. Financial documents this time. Bank statements showing accounts I'd never known existed, property deeds for homes in California and Florida, investment portfolios worth millions of dollars. All in Brandon's name alone, hidden from his family, squirreled away while I'd been clipping coupons and reusing tea bags. "Brandon," Richard's voice held a note of professional concern. "What is this?" But Zoe was already speaking, her young voice cutting through the adult confusion with devastating clarity. "Those are just Dad's hidden assets. Offshore accounts, shell companies, properties bought with fraudulently reported income." "Keep going, Dad. The best part is coming." The third layer contained something that made Carol gasp audibly. A hospital bracelet, yellowed with age, bearing the name Lisa Santos and dates from 2 years ago. Beside it, a death certificate with the same name, cause of death listed as breast cancer. "Who is Lisa Santos?" Ashley demanded, her sharp lawyer instincts engaged. Brandon's mask was cracking, sweat beading on his forehead despite the December chill. With shaking hands, he lifted the fourth layer, and a birth certificate came into view. The paper was official, legal, undeniable. Mother, Lisa Santos. Father, Brandon Michael Webb. Child, Dylan Matthew Santos. Date of birth, September 15, 2005. The mathematics were simple and devastating. Dylan had been born 18 months after Zoe, conceived during one of Brandon's many business trips to Los Angeles. "Oh my God," Jennifer Walsh whispered. "You have another son?" But Zoe wasn't finished. The final layer contained letters, printed emails, and photographs of a young man who looked so much like Brandon it was startling. The resemblance was unmistakable, the same dark hair, the same strong jaw, the same intense eyes. This was Brandon's son, the child he'd supported financially but never acknowledged. "His name is Dylan," Zoe said, her voice growing stronger with each revelation. "His mother died of cancer 2 years ago. He's been trying to contact you ever since, Dad. Trying to understand why his father sends money but won't even return a phone call." Brandon seemed to shrink in his chair, the confident businessman evaporating before our eyes. "Zoe, you don't understand. I understand that you have another child. I understand that while you told Mom we couldn't afford her therapy, you were paying for Dylan's college tuition. I understand that you built a secret life while systematically destroying ours." The room erupted in shocked murmurs, but Zoe held up her hand for silence. She walked to the front door, her movements deliberate and sure, and turned the lock. "And Dad," she said, her hand still on the deadbolt, "your son is here. I invited him to meet his family." The doorbell rang as if on cue, a sound that seemed to come from another world entirely. No one moved. No one breathed. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Somebody should answer that, Zoe said calmly. After all, it's Christmas Eve. No one should be alone on Christmas Eve. She opened the door, and a tall young man stepped into our living room. Dylan Santos, 19 years old, wearing a simple button-down shirt and jeans, carrying nothing but car keys and the weight of a lifetime of questions. The resemblance was even more striking in person. He had Brandon's build, Brandon's posture, even Brandon's way of scanning a room when he entered. But where Brandon's presence commanded attention through force of personality, Dylan's was quiet, uncertain, vulnerable. "Hello," he said simply, his voice carrying a slight California accent. "I'm Dylan." The silence that followed was absolute. 20 years of lies, exposed in the space of 5 minutes. A secret son, standing in our living room like living proof of everything wrong with our marriage. The perfect Christmas tableau, detonated by a 17-year-old girl who decided enough was enough. In 30 seconds, 20 years of lies had evaporated like morning mist, leaving nothing but the stark, undeniable truth. The silence shattered like glass. Brandon shot to his feet, his chair tipping backward as rage and panic warred across his face. Dylan stood frozen in the doorway, probably questioning every decision that had brought him to this moment. "This is insane," Brandon sputtered, pointing an accusing finger at Zoe. "You had no right to. No right." Zoe's voice cut through his protests like a blade. "I had no right to invite my brother to Christmas dinner. I had no right to tell the truth about what kind of man you are." Dylan stepped further into the room, his eyes moving from Brandon to the scattered evidence on the coffee table. "I didn't know," he said quietly, "about any of this. About her." He looked at me with genuine sorrow. "About your family." "I'm sorry." Carol's wine glass slipped from her fingers, red wine blooming across the cream-colored carpet like spilled blood. "Another grandson," she whispered, her face a map of shock and dawning horror. "Brandon, what have you done?" "Shut up, Mother." Brandon's voice was raw, desperate. "You don't understand the situation." "I understand perfectly," Ashley interrupted, rising from her chair with the predatory grace of someone scenting blood in the water. "You're exactly like Dad was. Exactly like the man who destroyed our mother with his lies and cheating. I thought you were better than him." She turned to Jake with disgust. "Remember what I told you about our father? About why I never wanted children. This is why. This is the Webb family legacy." Richard and Susan Chin exchanged glances that spoke volumes. Tom Walsh was already reaching for his phone, undoubtedly calculating the political fallout of being associated with this disaster. These weren't just personal relationships imploding, these were business partnerships, political alliances, financial arrangements all collapsing in real time. Dylan moved toward me, his young face full of compassion. "Mrs. Webb, I want you to know I never wanted to hurt anyone. My mom told me about my father before she died. She said he was a good man who made bad choices. I thought maybe he'd want to know me now that she's gone." His words broke something inside me. This boy had lost his mother to cancer, had reached out for the only family he had left, and been ignored for 2 years. Meanwhile, I'd been afraid to open my own medical results, hidden in my apron like a guilty secret. "Brandon," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Is he your son?" Brandon's eyes darted between Dylan and the guests, calculating damage, searching for escape routes that didn't exist. "Madison, this isn't the time." "Is he your son?" I repeated, louder this time. "Yes." The word came out like a confession torn from his throat. "But you don't understand the circumstances. Were there others?" My questions were precision strikes now, each one surgical. "Other children? Other women you've been supporting while telling me we couldn't afford my medical bills?" I pulled the crumpled envelope from my apron, the medical results I'd been too scared to open. With hands that didn't shake, I tore it open and read the words that would have terrified me hours ago. "Benign, I announced to the room. The lump was benign. But I've been carrying this envelope for weeks, afraid to open it, because you made me believe we couldn't afford proper health care. While you were paying another woman's medical bills. While you were paying for another child's education. Madison, please. I'm leaving you, Brandon. The words came out calm, final, like a judge passing sentence. Tonight. The room erupted again, but this time Brandon's mask completely disintegrated. 20 years of controlled rage, of feeling entitled to everything while giving nothing in return, poured out of him like poison from a lanced wound. You'll get nothing, he roared, advancing on me with a fury that made several guests step back. Nothing. I'll destroy you in court. I'll make sure you end up on the street where you belong. Dylan moved between us, this boy who barely knew me but recognized threat when he saw it. Hey, that's enough. Don't you dare. Brandon whirled on his son, jabbing a finger at his chest. Don't you dare speak to me. You're nothing. A mistake I paid for to keep quiet. The cruelty in his voice stunned even the jaded adults in the room. This wasn't just about adultery or financial deception anymore. This was about a man so fundamentally broken that he could reject his own child with such venom. You're right, Dylan said quietly, meeting Brandon's glare without flinching. I am nothing to you. But you're nothing to me either. I came here hoping to find a father, but I see you're just a sad, angry man who destroys everything he touches. Richard Chun cleared his throat, his business instincts kicking in. Brandon, I think Susan and I should leave. We'll need to discuss the Riverside project tomorrow. The Riverside project? Brandon spun toward his business partner, desperately trying to salvage something from the wreckage. Richard, this is personal. This doesn't affect our business relationship. Doesn't it? Tom Walsh spoke up, his political antenna finely tuned to scandal. Fraud, tax evasion, hidden assets? Brandon, there are legal implications here that go far beyond your marriage. As if summoned by his words, we heard car doors slamming outside. Through the front window, red and blue lights painted the living room walls in alternating colors. Police cars. The cavalry Zoe had called, knowing exactly how her father would react when cornered. Zoe, I breathed, understanding flooding through me. You called them. She nodded, pulling out her phone to show me the recording app that had been running throughout Brandon's threats. I started recording when he yelled about making you end up on the street. I sent it to the police station with the evidence from the box. They're here about the financial crimes, Mom, but the domestic violence charges are just a bonus. Brandon's face went white as two officers approached the front door. Ashley opened it before they could knock, her lawyer instincts fully engaged. Officers, she said, I'm Ashley Chen, Brandon Webb's sister and an attorney. I believe you're here about some financial irregularities our family has just discovered. Ma'am, the older officer replied, we received information about possible fraud, tax evasion, and threats of domestic violence. We need to speak with Mr. Brandon Webb. The perfect family Christmas had become a crime scene in our living room. Guests scattered like startled birds, gathering coats and purses with murmured excuses and promises to call later. Only Ashley and Jake remained, a united front of family support I hadn't expected. As the officers read Brandon his rights, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 20 years, freedom. Not just from him, but from the fear that had governed every decision, every word, every breath for 2 decades. Dylan approached me as his father was led away in handcuffs, his young face etched with shame that wasn't his to carry. Mrs. Webb, Madison, I'm so sorry. No, I said firmly, placing a hand on his shoulder. You have nothing to apologize for. Nothing that happened tonight was your fault. Carol sat in stunned silence, still staring at the wine stain on the carpet as if it contained answers to questions she didn't know how to ask. Finally, she looked up at Dylan with wonder in her eyes. You're my grandson, she said simply. I have another grandson. The night was far from over. There would be lawyers and police statements, reporters and social workers, a circus of consequences that would follow us for months. But standing in my ransacked living room, surrounded by the ruins of a lie I'd lived for 20 years, I felt something I'd forgotten existed. Hope. The weeks that followed Christmas were a blur of lawyers, investigators, and revelations that kept coming like aftershocks from an earthquake. What I thought was the complete truth that night turned out to be only the beginning. Brandon's financial crimes ran deeper than even Zoe's investigation had uncovered. The FBI arrived 3 days after Christmas, armed with warrants and hard drives. They set up in our dining room, the same space where we'd shared Christmas dinner, turning it into a makeshift command center. Agent Sarah Martinez, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, became my lifeline through the legal maze. Mrs. Webb, she explained during one of our long interviews, your husband wasn't just hiding assets from you. He was running a sophisticated money laundering operation through his real estate developments. The offshore accounts your daughter found? They're connected to investments from some very questionable sources. I sat in my own kitchen feeling like a stranger, learning about a man I'd lived with for 20 years. Brandon hadn't just been unfaithful and controlling. He'd been a criminal, and I'd been the perfect unknowing cover for his operations. The restraining order was granted immediately. Brandon was released on bail but couldn't come within 500 feet of the house, Zoe or me. For the first time in decades, I walked through my home without the constant tension of waiting for criticism, waiting for the next humiliation, waiting for the other shoe to drop. What surprised me most was the support that emerged from unexpected places. Ashley, who I'd always felt judged by, became a fierce advocate. She helped me understand my legal rights, connected me with the best divorce attorney in the state, and even offered to fund my legal fees. I watched him do to you what our father did to our mother, she told me over coffee one afternoon, her usual sharpness softened by genuine regret. I should have said something years ago. I should have helped you. Carol's transformation was perhaps the most startling. The woman who'd spent 20 years finding fault with everything I did suddenly became my strongest ally. She'd moved into the guest room, ostensibly to help during the crisis, but I suspected it was more about penance than assistance. I enabled him, she confessed one evening as we cleaned up after dinner. I raised him to believe women existed to serve men, that his father's behavior was normal. I created a monster, and you paid the price. Dylan had become an unexpected anchor in our newly reconfigured family. He delayed returning to college, wanting to help however he could. Watching him and Zoe bond as siblings was like watching a broken piece of my heart heal. They had the same quick wit, the same passion for justice, the same fierce loyalty to people they loved. You know, Dylan said one afternoon as he helped me reorganize Brandon's study into my home office, I was so angry at him for ignoring me. But seeing how he treated you and Zoe, I think I got the better deal with just neglect. My design business, dormant for 20 years, began to stir back to life. Ashley connected me with several high-end clients, and word spread quickly about my work. It turned out that 2 decades of creating beautiful spaces under extreme criticism had honed my skills to a razor's edge. I knew how to make spaces that felt like home because I'd been desperately trying to create one for 20 years. The first big break came from an unexpected source, Susan Chen. Despite her husband's terminated business relationship with Brandon, she reached out about redesigning their Manhattan penthouse. I've seen your work for 20 years, she told me during our consultation. Every time I came to your home, I was amazed by how you transformed that cold McMansion into something warm and inviting. I want that kind of magic in my space. As winter turned to spring, my calendar filled with projects. Architectural Digest called about featuring one of my designs. Harper's Bazaar wanted to interview me about building beauty from brokenness. The girl who'd given up her dreams to become Mrs. Brandon Webb was becoming Madison Clark again, but stronger, wiser, unbreakable. The support group started almost by accident. Other wives from our social circle began reaching out, sharing their own stories of financial control, public humiliation, private desperation. We met weekly in my living room, the same space where my life had exploded, now repurposed as a sanctuary for healing. Madison gave us permission to see our own truth, said Patricia Walsh, Tom's wife, during one of our sessions. When she stood up to Brandon that night, she showed us we could stand up too. News of Brandon's crimes had rippled through the community like a stone dropped in still water. His business empire crumbled as investors fled and properties were seized. Partners who'd once golfed with him now crossed the street to avoid association. The man who'd built his identity on success and control was left with nothing but a jail cell and the consequences of his choices. Dr. Michael Rodriguez entered my life during a cancer support group meeting I'd attended out of solidarity for other women. He was an oncologist, recently widowed, with kind eyes and gentle hands. Our first coffee was supposed to be about fundraising for cancer research. Our second was definitely a date. I spent so long thinking love meant accepting cruelty, I told him one evening as we walked along the beach. I thought partnership meant making yourself smaller so someone else could feel bigger. Real love, he replied, taking my hand, makes you feel larger, not smaller. It makes you more yourself, not less. Brandon wrote letters from prison, long rambling things full of blame and self-pity and demands for forgiveness. I read the first few, then handed them to my lawyer unread. Forgiveness wasn't the same as reconciliation. Understanding wasn't the same as excusing. I could forgive the broken man who'd hurt us, but I wouldn't pretend he hadn't broken us in the first place. The civil suits would take years to resolve, but early indications suggested we'd recover most of the hidden assets. Dylan would finally have the college fund he deserved. Zoe would have choices I'd never had. And I would have security, real security, built on truth instead of lies. You know what the best part is? Zoe said one evening as we prepared dinner together, Dylan setting the table while Carol arranged flowers. We're not pretending anymore. We're messy and real and honest, and we actually like each other. She was right. We'd lost a father and husband, but we'd gained so much more: integrity, independence, and the kind of chosen family that felt like coming home to yourself after being lost for decades. The girl who'd given up everything to be perfect for a man who would never see her worth had become a woman who knew her value was never up for debate. 6 months after that Christmas Eve, our house felt different. The same walls, the same floors, but the air itself had changed. Where once there had been tension so thick you could taste it, now there was laughter, the sound of teenagers arguing about whose turn it was to load the dishwasher, and the comfortable quiet of people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Dylan had officially transferred his credits to UConn, wanting to stay close to the family he was still getting to know. He carried Lisa's loss with him like a careful weight, but sharing memories of her with us seemed to lighten the burden somehow. He told us about her paintings, her terrible cooking, her infectious laugh that he'd inherited along with Brandon's eyes. She would have loved you, he told me one afternoon as we worked in the garden together. She always said I needed a mom who would challenge me to be better. She meant academically, but I think she would have meant emotionally too. Zoe and Dylan's sibling relationship developed with the intensity of people making up for lost time. They had inside jokes within weeks, a shared sense of humor that involved elaborate pranks on Carol, and a protective instinct toward me that was both touching and occasionally overwhelming. You guys don't have to monitor my dates, I told them after Michael left one evening and found them debriefing about his intentions at the kitchen table. We're not monitoring, Zoe protested. We're being supportively observant. Very different things, Dylan agreed solemnly. Carol had become a revelation in grandmotherhood, making up for decades of critical distance with fierce protectiveness and surprising fun. She taught Dylan to make her famous lemon bars and helped Zoe with her college application essays. When Brandon tried to call the house from prison, Carol was the one who told him to lose the number. "I spent too many years making excuses for bad behavior," she told me. "I won't waste whatever time I have left doing it again." My design business had taken on a life of its own. The Architectural Digest feature had led to more high-profile clients than I could handle. I'd hired 2 junior designers and was contemplating opening an actual office space, though I loved working from home surrounded by my chosen family. The support group had evolved too. What started as informal gatherings in my living room had become Madison's House, a nonprofit organization providing resources for women leaving financially abusive relationships. Ashley served on the board, using her legal expertise to help women navigate complex divorce proceedings. We'd helped 37 women in 6 months, providing everything from legal referrals to temporary housing to job placement services. "You're changing lives," Patricia Walsh told me after one of our group sessions. "Not just ours, but women all over the state are hearing about what you did and finding the courage to leave." The documentary filmmaker had been persistent, wanting to tell our story as part of a larger piece about financial abuse in marriage. I'd been hesitant until Dylan suggested we use it as a platform to talk about the children caught in these situations, the ones who watch their parents' marriages and learn warped lessons about love and power. "Maybe if people see what it looks like," Zoe said, "they'll recognize it in their own lives before it goes on for 20 years. Brandon's trial was set for the fall. The prosecutors were confident about the financial crimes charges. The domestic violence charges were harder to prove, built mostly on testimony and patterns of behavior rather than physical evidence. But even without those, he was looking at significant prison time. He'd been offering plea deals through his lawyer, desperate to avoid trial. Each offer came with demands to see Zoe, to have supervised visits, to maintain some connection to the family he'd spent 2 decades controlling and betraying. "He still thinks he owns us," Zoe observed after his latest attorney contacted mine about working out a reasonable visitation schedule. "That's the thing about narcissists," Ashley explained during one of her visits. "They genuinely believe other people exist solely for their benefit. The idea that you might have lives and feelings independent of him literally doesn't compute." Dr. Michael had been patient with my healing process, understanding that trust would take time to rebuild. Our relationship developed slowly, built on friendship and respect rather than the overwhelming passion that had swept me into marriage with Brandon at 21. "I'm not in a hurry," he told me when I apologized for being cautious. "I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you. We have time to do this right." He was good with the kids, treating Dylan like the adult he was becoming while still acknowledging his grief, and engaging with Zoe's sharp intellect without feeling threatened by it. When Carol declared him acceptable, we all knew he'd passed some crucial test. The house itself had been transformed too. I'd removed all traces of Brandon's presence, his awards and photos, and accumulated symbols of success. In their place, I'd hung Dylan's mother's paintings, family photos that included all of us, and artwork from local artists I supported through the nonprofit. The dining room where the FBI had set up their command center became Zoe and Dylan's study space, filled with college brochures and scholarship applications and the detritus of young people building their futures. The formal living room where Brandon had held court became our family room, with comfortable couches and Dylan's guitar in the corner. "This feels like home now," Dylan said one evening as we all sprawled in front of the television, watching one of Zoe's true crime documentaries. "It didn't before?" I asked, surprised. "No," Zoe answered for him. "Before, it felt like a museum. Pretty to look at, but don't touch anything. Now it feels lived in, loved in." She was right. The house had been Brandon's stage set, perfectly arranged to display as success. Now it was shelter for a real family built on choice rather than obligation, love rather than control, truth rather than carefully maintained lies. We lost a father and husband that Christmas Eve, but in losing him, we found each other. We found Dylan, whose gentle strength reminded me daily that not all men were like Brandon. We found Carol's capacity for growth at 73. We found Zoe's incredible courage and wisdom. Most importantly, I found myself. Not the Madison who'd been Brandon's wife, but the woman I'd been before him and the woman I was becoming after him. Someone strong enough to build a new life from the ashes of an old one. Someone wise enough to know that family isn't about blood or marriage certificates, but about choosing to show up for each other, day after day, with honesty and love. Christmas Eve arrived again, but this time it came like a gentle friend rather than a dreaded obligation. The same house, the same month, but everything else had been transformed. The living room still sparkled with lights, but they were warm white instead of the cold perfectionist glitter Brandon had preferred. The tree was real instead of artificial, filling the house with the earthy scent of pine. Our guest list was smaller, but infinitely richer. Dylan, now a pre-med student at UConn with a full scholarship. Zoe, home from Stanford for winter break, where she was double majoring in computer science and journalism. Carol, who'd moved permanently into the guest room and claimed she was too old to live alone anyway. Ashley and Jake, bringing wine and laughter and stories from the city. Dr. Michael, who felt so naturally part of our family now that I sometimes forgot he hadn't always been here. The dinner was simple compared to the elaborate productions of years past. We'd ordered most of it from the local gourmet market, focusing on spending time together rather than proving anything to anyone. No business partners to impress, no political allies to cultivate, no performance necessary. Remember last year? Zoe asked as we gathered around the table, passing plates family style instead of the formal service Brandon had insisted upon. When I walked in with that box? How could we forget? Dylan grinned, helping Carol with her plate. Most dramatic gift reveal in Christmas history. It was a good box, Carol added with surprising humor. Very thorough. Very. What's the word you young people use? Receipts. Lots of receipts. We all laughed, able to find humor in something that had been so devastating at the time. Distance had given us perspective, healing had given us strength, and truth had given us freedom. I was so scared, I admitted, looking around the table at these people who'd become my real family. Not just of Brandon's reaction, but of what would happen after. I'd never lived on my own, never supported myself, never made decisions without considering his approval first. And look at you now, Ashley said, raising her wine glass. Featured in Architectural Digest, running a nonprofit, engaged to a wonderful man who actually likes you as a person. The engagement ring still felt strange on my finger. Michael had proposed 3 weeks ago, not with a dramatic public gesture, but during a quiet moment in my office, while I was sketching layouts for a new project. He'd gotten down on one knee between fabric swatches and paint samples, offering me my grandmother's ring that I'd thought was lost forever. I found it in the evidence box, he'd explained. Brandon had pawned it years ago. I bought it back from the shop. We hadn't set a date yet. There was no rush, no desperation, just the quiet certainty of two people who'd found something real and were determined to build it slowly and carefully. A toast, Michael said now, standing with his glass. To family. Not the kind you're born into, but the kind you choose. The kind you build with love and honesty and forgiveness. To Madison, Dylan added, who taught me that family isn't about DNA or duty, but about showing up. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. To truth, Zoe said simply, the gift that keeps on giving. To Christmas boxes, Carol said with a mischievous smile and the courage to open them. We clinked glasses, and I felt a peace I hadn't known was possible. The documentary had been released 3 months ago, and the response had been overwhelming. Women reached out daily, sharing their own stories, asking for help, thanking us for showing that escape was possible. Madison's house had expanded to 3 states, with plans for national reach. Brandon had accepted a plea deal in November, 8 years in federal prison in exchange for cooperation with investigators looking into his business associates. He'd written asking to see Zoe and Dylan for Christmas, letters full of self-pity and manipulation that we'd forwarded to our lawyers unread. I sometimes wonder, Dylan said thoughtfully, if he understands what he lost. Not just the money or the freedom, but this. A family who actually likes each other. Narcissists don't really understand love, Ashley observed. They understand possession, control, transaction. But not love. That's his tragedy, I said, meaning it. Not ours. After dinner, we exchanged gifts. Small, meaningful things rather than expensive displays. Dylan had framed one of his mother's paintings for me, a watercolor of sunflowers that brought tears to my eyes. Zoe had compiled a photo book of our year together, documenting not the major milestones, but the small moments of healing and joy. Carol gave us all matching ornaments she'd made by hand, small ceramic angels with each of our names painted in her careful script. For next year's tree, she said. And the year after that. And all the years to come. Michael's gift to me was a set of architectural drawing tools, beautiful wooden instruments in a leather case. For the woman who rebuilds beautiful things from broken pieces, he said. As the evening wound down and our guests prepared to leave, I found myself standing in the kitchen with Zoe and Dylan, doing dishes together like the most natural thing in the world. The same kitchen where I'd once hidden medical bills and hoarded gift cards, now filled with easy conversation and shared tasks. You know what I realized? Zoe said, drying a wine glass. Last Christmas, I was so angry about what Dad was doing to you that I wanted to destroy him. But I didn't destroy him. I set us free. Truth sets you free, Dylan agreed. Even when it's painful. Even when it's messy. Especially then, I added, thinking of all the truths we'd had to face this year. Brandon's crimes, Dylan's existence, my own complicity in my own oppression, the long work of healing from decades of psychological abuse. Later, after everyone had gone home or gone to bed, I sat in my living room with Michael, watching the tree lights twinkle and listening to the quiet sounds of my family settling in for the night. Zoe FaceTiming with college friends in her room, Dylan researching medical schools on his laptop, Carol reading in bed with her door ajar. Happy? Michael asked, pulling me closer on the couch. Yes, I said, surprised by how simple the answer was. Actually, genuinely happy. Good, he murmured against my hair. You deserve happiness. I thought about Brandon, alone in his cell tonight, probably raging about the injustice of his situation, unable to understand that his punishment wasn't really prison, but the loss of something he'd never truly had. Real love. Authentic connection. A family built on truth instead of fear. That Christmas box Zoe had given him hadn't destroyed our family. It had revealed that we'd never really had one. Now we did. A real family, chosen and nurtured and protected, built on honesty instead of performance, love instead of control, choice instead of obligation. The truth had set us free. And freedom, I'd learned, was the gift that kept on giving. Not just for Christmas, but for all the days to come.